Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of the Nimrod Pod. I am your embattled host, Lou Stump, alongside my brothers in arms, Chet Lifkit and Mel Goodman. I am beyond excited to announce the return of our faithful producer, Joey Donati. Joey will be keeping this operation afloat from the Nimrod Central Command Center, and we couldn't be more pumped to have him back in the booth as we enter the new year. In the coming months, we will be expanding the content ecosystem of the Nimrod Pod by elevating the production quality of our show and expanding to a variety of new formats. We cannot wait to share our plans to take this program to the next level. Make sure you are following at the Nimrod Pod on X for updates. Now, let's dive into the news. Today, we will be conducting a full, in-depth analysis of the United States intervention in Venezuela and the new international order that has arisen in the wake of Operation Absolute Resolve. The geopolitical landscape has been permanently marked by President Trump's decision to raid Venezuela and capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The situation is extremely complicated. Whether you're an anti-war libertarian isolationist or a white-pilled warmongering neocon, whatever conclusion you have drawn is premature. Your typical talking points have been rendered useless, and everything we thought we knew about geopolitics has changed. The United States is now explicitly an empire. You could certainly argue we have been an empire for some time. But the difference between the last 120 years and earlier this week is we never admitted it, but now we are. Every time we have gone into foreign countries, there has been a pretext for U.S. intervention. We were typically fed the Star Wars story of good versus evil. We're fighting for human rights and democracy by stopping tyranny in a foreign country. But behind the communicated narrative has always been a calculation to benefit the United States. In the Middle East wars, it was all about controlling energy, oil and gas. What makes Operation Absolute Resolve so different is that President Trump explicitly said, we are intervening because of the resources. Now, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserve in the world. The oil is in our hemisphere, but it is being sent to China. Trump is not allowing this to continue, and he's being straightforward with his intentions. This is American interest, and we are going to intervene for our own good. This time, the justification is national interest, but that doesn't mean intervention is actually in the best interest of the American people. And it certainly doesn't mean that it is the morally right thing to do. We're not here to tell you whether or not it was the right thing to do. It already happened. We're going to lay out all the facts, discuss the historical precedents behind Trump's decision, war game what geopolitical dominoes will fall next, and steelman every single argument along the way. We're going to dive into oil and the petrodollar, the Monroe Doctrine, the treachery of nation building, and a new divide within the America First movement, imperialism versus isolationism. Nimrods, let's start with oil. The United States intervened in Venezuela for its resources. As I said, specifically its sweet crude oil. Now, Glenn Beck has argued that Venezuelan intervention is about oil, but not oil for us. Beck claims that if the Venezuelan and Iranian regimes fall at the same time, China will lose 70% roughly of their non-US regulated oil supply. Here's the kicker. There is no BRICS reserve currency. So this would theoretically be seen as a massive chess move for control of the petrodollar. What Beck failed to mention is that China only gets 4% of its oil from Venezuela and 9% of its oil from Iran. China gets over 70% of their oil from Russia. So as long as they have Russia as an ally, they will not have an oil problem. So you may ask, well, what about Russia? Where do they get their oil from? Russia gets virtually 100% of its oil from its own domestic fields. There's literally nothing we can do in South America or anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere to actually disrupt Russia's oil supply. China would not collapse without Venezuelan or Iranian oil. So to me, it seems we snatched Venezuela's oil to increase our own oil supply and control oil production in the Western Hemisphere. Nimrods, do you agree with my hypothesis?
The oil question is definitely something to think about. A lot of people like to say that the oil in Venezuela is unusable, basically, because it's heavy crude and it's sour. And the oil that we refine in the United States is extremely light. It comes from shale fracking, but the heavy oil, I think, as long as we control the output and we're in control of the area around it and who's involved and what tankers are allowed to move through there. I think if we're doing anything, we might as well sell it. They're producing it and we're taking it. We might as well sell it. There's a lot of arguments about the investment that would be required for us to take advantage of this fully, especially in refineries in the United States. And I say the big oil companies are going to need absolute certainty that this is going to be a long-term play, that we're going to have long-term control in Venezuela. And I don't think they have that right now. A lot of people disagree with Trump's decision. A lot of people disagree with our intervention. And in 4 years, a Democrat could win. In 3 years, sorry, the Democrat could win, and we'd have a big problem on our hands if all of our major oil companies went down there and invested billions of dollars right now, and they were forced to pull out. Another thing that's good for the oil industry is that Venezuela owed all the major oil companies a lot of money and a lot of assets, and now they're being paid back. So, a couple of small wins in a confusing sea of information. I don't know if this is all about oil as much as it is about influence in the Western Hemisphere. China and Russia were very influential as of late in Venezuela, especially China. They moved in with a $1 billion floating oil facility to pump 60,000 barrels a day. There's companies that are down there in the Guyana block and the Venezuela block that are tag teaming it with Chevron and ExxonMobil. And their influence in the Western Hemisphere is growing, and it needs to stop. And that's when I wanted to get into the Monroe Doctrine, but I'll let the rest of the Nimrods get a stab at it.
Lou, I like the words you use describing the United States, the modern United States, and that's empire. I feel like we were founded on freedom and we wanted to be isolated from these people that were taxing us and not treating us right. And now we're showing our true colors between this and the desire for Trump and company to go and acquire Greenland. These are things that I feel like past administrations have kept to themselves. They're going to try and go under the radar to get their things done. But Trump and company are just putting it all out there. So last Thursday morning, I believe it was, when I saw this news about Venezuela and Maduro, I was kind of upset. Actually, I was very upset. So I didn't understand because at this point I thought it was about regime change. I didn't want another regime change to happen because historically they have not been very successful. Then you read into the details. At the time, they were trying to blame Maduro for drugs, and then we came to find that drugs in the United States was not the motive. Then to myself, I thought, oh, this is self-defense for the country because communist countries can come to Venezuela, bring in warheads, be in the Americas and be closer to the US if they wished harm against us. And then you hear about oil and you see that Venezuela is the leader in oil production and has the most, and they're shipping it all over the world. That, after hearing Trump in his press conference, seems to be the sole reason. I don't understand that because, like I just said regarding empire, I always thought America was independent with interest to its own people, with the protection and respect for other nations. And now we're just invading other nations for resources for us. It's a little bit gut wrenching and confusing to me because that's not the America I thought I knew. And Chet, maybe it is just an image to show the American military power. We bring in our crew of Delta Force and these other Army personnel. Not a single military personnel is killed. There's 32 Cubans guarding Maduro in the complex, all of them dead. Maduro and his wife, untouched, unscathed, unharmed, brought back in one piece. I'm sure if you guys have been reading, one of the helicopter pilots got shot 3 times in the leg and still continued to fly the helicopter. 5 U.S. injuries, 2 minor, I believe. However, everybody survived in the end. This is exemplary military strength, and it could be for show as well. That's another thing to consider. And we did execute it perfectly.
Great points from both of you. I think it all comes down to we're not going to allow oil to be manufactured in our hemisphere and sent to the Eastern Hemisphere. We're not going to allow Russia and China to come in and exert their influence on our neighbors. We have $17 trillion worth of oil that we confiscated. And this is $17 trillion that could benefit the American people. Now, that is unless it's spent overseas in a pointless foreign war, but that's $17 trillion. Can we pay down our national debt? Can we lower oil prices? Can we create more American jobs? Those questions have not been answered yet, and we can't act like they already have. We can't celebrate in the first quarter. That's foolish. And of course, there's the libertarian debate of, does the oil even belong to the United States? I think the real question is, does it matter if it belongs to us or not? Aren't we America first? America first means acting in our own interests. It is yet to be seen if this will play out the way we want it to, but we certainly are acting in our own interests, be it imperialist interests, not isolationist interests. And I think this parlays into the conversation about the new multipolar war. And I think by executing Operation Absolute Resolve, Trump has completely ended the United Nations, NATO, and every single other international organization for good. The WHO, the World Trade Organization, you name it, they're dead. And it all comes back to the Monroe Doctrine. And Trump is now calling it the Donroe Doctrine. And I'd love to hear what Chet's opinion is on the Monroe Doctrine, how it sets a precedent for Trump's actions, and how Trump's actions have now transformed the entire geopolitical landscape.
The Monroe Doctrine, it first came about in 1823. I don't know. I don't want to speak on the validity of it in terms of, is it morally right or do we have the right to do it? I just want to speak on the influence that it's had over time. It's been our foreign policy for the Western Hemisphere since 1823, and the policy changed in 1904 when Theodore Roosevelt expanded it and became the Roosevelt Corollary. But it's used to explain United States actions in the Western Hemisphere, which includes the Caribbean, Central America, and Latin America. So definitely Venezuela. And so I think how it applies here is that whenever China and Russia are exerting their influence over Venezuela or Panama or any other country in our hemisphere, Argentina, whenever the Chinese fishing boats fish up all of their waters and ruin their ecological landscape, I think that basically this precedent gives Trump and the administration a right to put that to an end. So I think it was justified under that precedent. I don't know if it was morally right to go down and basically take control of Venezuela. You know, there's people down there that they have an independent country. I don't personally think that this is going to benefit the American people, at least directly. You know, maybe indirectly in some abstract sense, but I can tell you for damn sure that nobody is going to see any of that $17 trillion of oil in their pockets. So I mean, people that would argue that on X, like I think I've seen a few times, it's just ridiculous. So the main piece here I mean, obviously, we're saying it's justified by the Monroe Doctrine, but I think the main piece here is all of the American wars that we've been involved in since World War II have been struggle fests, limited, and it looks like people can get away with stuff now. So I think they're bluffing the military power of the United States so that people will believe it whenever we threaten them in the future. And that's what they did afterwards. They threatened Cuba, they threatened China and Russia. They they need decisive victories over in perfect fashion to be able to make these threats and have them mean anything. Or it's going to be the boy who cried wolf, and then we're going to have a big problem on our hands. So I think in the grand scheme of things, we think about America as an empire and about our global hegemony and our currency and the control that we exert over the world. I think it's a good thing for us. So I'm happy.
Chet, so from your perspective, then, do you believe that the US has the strongest, best military even before this attack? Do you think it even needs to be asked or shown that the United States is still capable of this for other people to believe it?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously do think that we have the strongest military. I think there's a case to be made that a lot of people, a growing number of people, didn't believe that. You know, especially people that hate America. They say that we lost in Vietnam. You know, we're losing in Ukraine. We can't finish Ukraine. So I think it was necessary to just, at least in the back of people's minds, they know the military power of the United States concretely right in front of their eyes. So I think it's helpful for that.
At this point, I believe that everything we're getting from the taking of Maduro in Venezuela is going to benefit the US, whether that is oil directly or indirectly, more than likely indirectly. I don't think, like you said, Chet, we will see much of that helping our GDP and us here in the US. However, I think this military tactic is going to have a huge impact on other countries and how they perceive our modern day military. However, I'm not sure if this is intentional by the government or if it's just me being optimistic, but I think the best thing from Venezuela will be the indirect impact that preventing it, if regime change is successful, from becoming a fallen state like Iraq. To have an Iraq-esque state so close to the US, full of terrorist organizations and opportunity to be closer and harm the United States, bring people up through our open borders and cause terrorism here. I think that indirect impact at what I would give maybe a 20% success rate of actual regime change, if that's even the plan, could help the US.
Chad, I think you're right. Trump is definitely swinging his dick to break free of the New World Order and set up this new multipolar world. Russia has their sphere, China has their sphere, and the United States has the Western Hemisphere. And the globalists have been pushing Russia into China's arms for the past few decades. And as long as China and Russia are allied, we are screwed in a global war. And unfortunately, we are spiraling towards an inevitable global war that we need to prepare for. So Trump is taking an imperialist perspective to break free the United Nations and set up a new world order where we make our own decisions in the Western Hemisphere. Now, when it comes to the Monroe Doctrine, I think you failed to recognize that the Monroe Doctrine also states that the United States should not intervene in Central and South America, not just Europe. And I think Trump is actually modeling his geopolitical strategy off of Teddy Roosevelt's foreign policy. Now, Roosevelt used the Monroe Doctrine as a basis for his Roosevelt Corollary. In the Roosevelt Corollary, he essentially establishes the big stick diplomacy that Trump is now using in 2026. If we go back to the Monroe Doctrine, it was President James Monroe's State of the Union address where he said that the United States would oppose European colonization and interference in the Americas because it is hostile to our interests. But this also included U.S. neutrality in European affairs that occurred in Central and South America. Now, when Roosevelt's president, 1904, he adds a proactive element in his State of the Union address, where he says that the U.S. would intervene in Latin American countries to prevent European powers from doing so, and kind of act as an international police power to stabilize chronic wrongdoing and instability. And this is what justified U.S. interventions in Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. So essentially, Trump is basing his foreign policy off of Teddy Roosevelt. He worships James Monroe. He worships Teddy Roosevelt. He worships William McKinley. And now Trump is using force to secure economic interest in the Americas and the Western Hemisphere, just as Roosevelt did. And in fact, if we go back to 1902, Venezuela defaulted on loans secured from European countries. So Europe was highly involved in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, the Spanish Empire actually colonized most of the Central and South American countries before the U.S. became the world hegemon. And when Venezuela defaulted on these loans, these European countries sent their fleets to block Venezuelan ports. And Roosevelt swooped in and said, whoa, we will collect the money from Venezuela. You go back to your continent. We will get the money from them and we will pay you back. And that is essentially the exact same thing that is happening right now. Venezuela owes a lot of corporations a lot of money. And by Trump going in and taking control of their economy, seizing all of the oil, he's able to pay back those companies, most of them being American companies. So while I do think the Monroe Doctrine laid the groundwork for the Monroe Doctrine, what Trump is actually modeling his strategy off of is 100% the Roosevelt corollary. And there is a clear difference in everybody staying out of each other's affairs and the United States ruling with the big stick.
Glad you brought that up, Lou. See, I read this short article, and all they mentioned was that Roosevelt made the corollary. I remember reading about this in history class, but I think that it was a valid response to European actions in Latin America, because at the time we weren't the world hegemon and we didn't have the big stick to swing. You know, they had a sizable stick to swing, but not like today, especially not like after World War II. And so I think our action down there, right or wrong in relation to the independence of the Venezuelan people, I think it improves America's position on the world stage. And while that might not benefit all four of us in our pockets, even though it may, it may. Your stocks might go up, GDP might rise. But I think in the long term, we have more security and we have less people, less countries behind our back in our own hemisphere working against our interests and towards theirs. So it's all a chess move. And I think it's one of the best ones that I've seen out of Trump so far in this term. So I'm in full support mode right now.
Great points. I'll also add, since we're talking about Teddy Roosevelt is the president that backed Panama's secession from Colombia and actually secured the United States' rights to build and control the canal in perpetuity. The United States spent close to $500 million building out the Panama Canal, and we lost tens of thousands of American lives. Our ancestors died. They laid down their lives to build and construct the Panama Canal. And Jimmy Carter negotiated treaties for a gradual transfer with full Panamanian control by December 31st of 1999. And this was essentially a retreat from direct interventionism and gunboat diplomacy. And we have been walked all over by the New World Order and the globalists ever since. The weakest president of all time, Jimmy Carter, gave up the Panama Canal for nothing. And I wouldn't be surprised if Trump doesn't take back the Panama Canal next? He's taken a lot of action to set us up for it. And by taking away Venezuela, you're essentially chopping the head off of the South and Central American cartel. They allegedly controlled every cartel in the Western Hemisphere. And by cutting the head off the Hydra, getting rid of their boss, it splits them up into all these little factions, and they should be fairly easy to take over. Any thoughts on the Panama Canal?
Oh, I think we should take it back. Was it Jimmy Carter that gave it away? That was a terrible idea. And now we have China on both sides of the canal trading and controlling trade. And they're just scumbags. So we need to take it back. We need to take control of it. It's not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. And it is extremely beneficial to our security in the West. One of my questions, besides the fact that it was seemingly easy for this to happen, one of my questions is why were so many Cuban soldiers in there being security? Why were they in there? And also, where were the Venezuelan soldiers? Did they pay off all of the Venezuelan generals? All of the security forces? Did the special forces just clear him out and keep him quiet the whole time? I want to know why those Cubans were in there.
Everyone thinks that Venezuela was the head of all the cartels. They think Venezuela was the puppet master. But in reality, Maduro was a puppet for so many different countries. Like, we can talk about China and Russia, but they're in the Eastern Hemisphere. When it comes to Western Hemisphere, Cuba had full control of Maduro. That's why there were 50 Cuban soldiers and security people that were killed in our raid in Venezuela. And ultimately, with Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, being Cuban and clearly having a hard-on for Central and South America, I would imagine taking away Venezuela is taking away the piggy bank for the entire South American cartel. You get rid of that piggy bank, Cuba has no leverage. And now we're surrounding them on both sides. Colombia was talking a lot of shit after we captured Maduro, but they quickly changed their tone. They called President Trump, and Marco Rubio is there right now cooling down the situation. They are giving up, they're seceding, they're giving us everything we want. Cuba has yet to do the same. I would imagine if Cuba doesn't crumble from sheer peer pressure, we will go in there as well and topple their regime and take back what we think is rightfully ours. Before we get into regime change and nation building, I just want to talk a little bit about how Venezuelan intervention has set precedents for future operations all across the globe. Now, one thing's for certain. Operation Absolute Resolve was an incredible success. We went in, we swiftly captured President Maduro, we brought him back to New York, and not a single U.S. soldier died. There were 40 to 80 Venezuelans that were killed in the process. We don't know how many of them were men, how many were women and children, how many were soldiers, how many were civilians. But overall, that is an extreme success. We decapitated the head of their regime, and we installed their vice president, which I want to talk about. But everyone on MAGA Twitter started celebrating as soon as Trump tweeted, "We captured Maduro." And I compare this to a football team dogpiling their quarterback at the half-field line after the first quarter. We are prematurely celebrating, much like I do on the weekends with my lady. We are prematurely celebrating. With me, it's not an option, but MAGA is deliberately celebrating a win that has not yet happened. We won the first battle, but we're heading into a war. And not just a war being Venezuela, but an entire slew of wars all across the globe. And ultimately a massive world war that we are spiraling towards at incredible speed. The operation was successful. I never would have said, Trump, you should go raid Venezuela. I never would have given him the sign-off. I don't think it's an impeachable defense because of the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt corollary, but I don't support it. But ultimately, the operation happened, and it was successful, and we need to talk about what happens next. And I'm curious how much planning went into Act 2 of the Venezuelan raid in the White House. U.S. occupation would undoubtedly be worse than Vietnam. And any U.S. boots on the ground are stepping into a bear trap. I mean, Venezuela has already been run by the CIA for decades, for as long as we can remember. And Trump ultimately wanted to cut off the deep state's piggy bank. He calls it the Democrats' piggy bank, but ultimately it's the deep state's piggy bank. But he did this with major risk of being set up for disaster or a Bay of Pigs 2.0 by the CIA. Regardless of the fact that none of us voted for a Venezuelan raid, it happened, and thank God it was successful. Now, the battle was won. Let's talk about Act 2 of this war. The United States has a terrible track record in regime change and nation building. However, the past 30 or so years, this regime change and nation building has taken place in the Middle East and parts of Europe. This is inherently a completely different situation, being that it is in our own hemisphere. And we have a history of imperialism in our own hemisphere that dates back to the early 1900s. Mel, being the level-headed, anti-war, conservative libertarian in the group that you are, I'd love to hear your perspective on the treachery of nation building.
As you said, Lou, historically, we have a terrible track record with rebuilding countries, regime change, all of these things. One thing I do want to point out is Japan. It took us to drop 2 bombs on them to get them to put their guns down. And with that being said, now for a country all the way across the world, for them not to have guns, we have to protect them with our military. Is that something we're going to do with Venezuela now? Because I have very little belief in the fact that we can have regime change in Venezuela that will make it more of a democratic US-esque state. Since the founding of the United States, we have been isolationists. We have done our best not to get into other wars. For example, World War I, we're all the way across the sea. It didn't come until the very last moment when the United States got involved. The US doesn't even know how to expand. And if it was an act of war, or if this was an act of anti-war, which I hope it was, I don't believe the United States has a plan in place. How are they going to get Greenland and Venezuela and all of the resources in these countries without backlash from other countries? I love to speculate, and these actions without a proper plan just make no sense to me. So I want to ask you guys, do you believe that Venezuela in the long term, after regime change or even attempt to keep them from becoming a fallen state?
No, I don't think they will. Maybe for the short term, it'll be better. Maybe the people will get a leader that looks out for them, that upholds freedoms. But it's not because of a leader that these countries are successful. And it's not because of a leader that these countries fail. It's because of the people in them. I think that the violent criminals down there basically control the country, just like in Mexico. The cartels are too much of a problem, and they have too much control. So while I don't think that Venezuela will be better off, I do think that the United States will be better off. And that is to underscore my belief that we didn't do this for Venezuela. We did it for the United States. So, I mean, maybe they do have a plan. Maybe Marco Rubio has a plan to fix Venezuela. Maybe they're gonna help people out down there. Maybe the people will be happier. But I don't think that we have their interests in mind at all. Maybe in the least, but I don't think that we're very concerned about the Venezuelan people at all. One thing that I want to prevent is them becoming refugees and coming here. So I sure hope Marco Rubio has a good plan.
Yeah, we definitely don't need that, Chet. One thing that Trump just tweeted out was that he was informed that Venezuela is going to be purchasing only American-made products with the money they'll receive from the oil deal, to include agricultural products, American-made medicines, medical devices, and equipment, overall to improve Venezuela. So I see the vision that Trump's having here to push for, it is somewhat America first here. Although he's been kind of up and down in terms of that topic. But, I do see the vision. And as far as Venezuela goes, it's something that's going to be hard to predict. We're just going to have to strap up and see.
To answer your question, Mel, it's really hard to get a read of what Venezuelans actually think about this raid. We have Venezuelan refugees in America that fled Venezuela years ago, likely have families still in the home country that are celebrating, that are going to these anti-war protests in America and saying, fuck you, I'm Venezuelan. My family suffered. My family starved. My family was bankrupted in Venezuela. We had to flee. But then we have videos of pro-Maduro marches flooding the streets of Caracas. We have simultaneous videos across Venezuela of pro-America, pro-Trump marches and protests. And we even have several coup attempts that have been stopped in an attempt to take out Maduro's successor, his vice president. So is this the right thing for Venezuela? Will this work out for them in the long term? The thing is, I don't know. And for all the Fox News MAGA dads that are claiming we are liberating the Venezuelan people, we're giving them freedom. They hate us for our freedom, and we're going to give them democracy. You clearly haven't learned from your past mistakes. You've been duped over and over and over and over again. You suddenly think it's going to change. Now, there is a significant distinguishing variable, which is the fact that this is in our own hemisphere. But it doesn't change the fact that the United States is terrible at nation building. One thing that I find reassuring is that Trump has allowed Maduro's vice president to become the de facto president after the capture of Nicolas Maduro. And by keeping Maduro's regime in power, it gives Trump the opportunity to maintain stability and prevent anarchy all across Venezuela. We're allowing them to operate business as usual, but now they have the fear of God in their eyes, and Trump has his thumb on them. He is at least temporarily allowing Maduro's vice president to lead while we get all the resources we want and we find the right pro-America candidate to put up for election. Ultimately, the people of Venezuela need to vote in a free and fair election. There's a lot of discussion on whether or not they had a free and fair election before. And I'm seeing people saying that Maduro stole the election and everybody hated him. And I'm seeing, Venezuela actually has really free and fair elections. It's Smartmatic, the Venezuelan-owned company, that they were actually exporting into other countries to rig their elections and create election fraud. But in their own countries, there was no election fraud. So it's really hard to believe, which is true. I would imagine if they are the experts at rigging elections and creating fraud, they were probably doing it in their own country. But I'm not going to assume one way or another. I'm just going to use my big boy brain to figure that one out. Now, I'm reassured by the fact that Trump has allowed Maduro's second hand to take power. The question is, can she maintain stability at all before they have an election? Are they going to allow an election? How are we going to make sure it's a free and fair election without boots on the ground? And how do we put in a pro-America candidate if the people aren't looking for a pro-America candidate? This is a very complicated situation. And I question how much thought Rubio and the rest of the Trump administration put into Act 2 of this Venezuelan intervention. I'll throw a question back to you guys. What is the best case scenario for the United States? We haven't done the regime change. We cut off the head of the Hydra. We're going to have to allow an election or somehow install someone that the people accept. What is the best case scenario for the United States?
I think first of all, Lou, so far has been the best case scenario. They went in, they got the job done. without any notice. There was no leaks, and everybody saw it. Everybody across the world saw it happen perfectly. We had however many American soldiers wounded, maybe some damage to a helicopter, but other than that, it was perfect, and everybody saw it. So I think so far, this is the best case scenario. I think in the future, we need we need to install a stable leader in Venezuela who I think they're ready for. It needs to be somebody that they approve of, the people of Venezuela, and it needs to be somebody who's going to act in America's interests. And this is no new thing. This is not a new trick. We've been doing this in South America and Latin America for 75 years now. So, I mean, we have experience. Even though it's bad experience, we at least know what doesn't work. So, I think best case scenario, we get a good leader in power who respects both the people of Venezuela and the Americans. Because, for a while, the Maduro and the Chavez, right? Chavez government, they were increasingly becoming pains in the ass of America, especially people that wanted to operate business in the region. So I think if we get somebody that's preferential towards America, which we obviously will, then we'll have completed the best case scenario for us. And the rest of the world, they already saw what happened, and they saw that it was the best case scenario for us. They saw the Delta boys go in there and take them out, lights out. They already know what would happen to them if they ever stepped out of line. So I think we're on track.
It all comes down to what the people of Venezuela want. We as Americans, besides voting fraud, always elect our officials in. And as of recently, it goes to one party and then switches over to another. So the issue with regime change is you bring somebody in that encompasses the beliefs of your nation into a different nation. And if those people don't like that person, well, that's unfair for the people who would be voting for that person in that country. I think the only thing that really matters is for a free election to take place. I don't know if that's going to need boots on the ground or a different system in terms of an open, free election in Venezuela. But I personally believe, since I doubt regime change so much, that the only way Venezuela can save itself with US assistance is a free election where they can be represented by the person that best fits the needs of what the country believes, or else this was all a waste of time.
Great points all around. So we talked about oil. We talked about this new multipolar world and the death of globalism. We talked about the treachery of nation building and what happens next in Venezuela. But let's widen our scope a little bit and talk about how U.S. intervention in Venezuela sets the precedence for future operations all across the globe. We touched on Cuba and Colombia, and we talked about Russian oil. But I want to dive a little deeper into how what happened in Venezuela is going to impact the Ukraine war as we enter this new multipolar world. Now, former Russian President Medvedev said that Trump's actions in Venezuela essentially give Russia the green light to take control of their sphere of influence and use extremely aggressive, violent military action to end the conflict in Ukraine. And at the end of the day, when you're thinking about Russia, Ukraine, and you're comparing it to United States, Venezuela, you have to apply the same logic. Russia exists in their sphere of influence, and NATO tried to place nuclear bombs on their bordering country. And they took military action, proactive military action, to prevent that from happening and protect their sphere of influence. Russia or China never attempted to place nuclear bombs or missiles in Venezuela, but we went in anyway. You could argue we just didn't even let it get close to that point. The Russian and Chinese influence in the Americas has only grown exponentially in the past few decades. And Trump is essentially saying no more. So if you're supporting Russia's right to defend their sphere of influence, you kind of have to apply that same logic in Venezuela. Do you disagree?
I do not disagree at all. Like I said, for all of history, I thought America acted in self-preservation and isolation. And while I think that still applies here with the Venezuela by keeping nuclear warheads outside of the country within the Americas, you're right. You have to understand why Russia is doing this with Ukraine. While there's a lot of death and it's a lot different story, at least at this point in time, we only started this quote unquote war or anti-war within the last week. It would be true to call us hypocritical.
But how big of a problem is that? We could be called hypocritical and nothing is going to happen. The trade alliances aren't because people are friends, and we don't have allies because everybody likes each other and everybody wants to hang out and jerk each other off. It's because we have military power that keeps people safe. And so I think being a hypocrite in this sense is not the worst thing in the world. Obviously Russia wants to protect its own sovereign land and keep us away from its borders and keep NATO away from its borders. But I don't think that we need to let them do that. So I'm confusing myself.
Yeah, and Russia has shown tremendous restraint in Ukraine. That they waited until NATO encroached on their border and was about to allow Ukraine to join NATO and place a bunch of United States nuclear weapons on their border. And I think everyone would agree Russia has not only shown tremendous restraint, but they've shown far too much restraint. And we would never allow it to get to that point in our own hemisphere. We would never allow China or Russia to place nukes in Mexico or Venezuela. And we're making sure we get ahead of this before we back ourselves into a corner and we're forced into the most significant conflict of the modern age and put ourselves at risk of nuclear holocaust every single moment of every day. So I understand why we would want to take control of our hemisphere and kick China and Russia out. I know people don't like talking about the Star Wars story of good versus evil. We're the good guys. China's the bad guys. Russia the bad guys. The truth of the matter is we do bad shit all the time. China does bad shit all the time. Russia does bad shit all the time. But at the end of the day, we're Americans, and we need to look out for our interests and say, fuck it, all them. And this gets into the discussion of moralism versus nationalism. We'll get there in a minute. But at the end of the day, Russia is so significant. We talked about how China is completely reliant on Russia for oil. And so long as Russia and China are entangled, we cannot survive. The United States, American empire, cannot survive a global war as long as China and Russia are allied. So how do we defeat the New World Order once and for all and win the rat race against the CCP? The only answer is allying with Russia above all other partnerships. We could literally get rid of every other partner we have. As long as we just dominate the shit out of the Western Hemisphere and we ally with Russia, we can run the entire world for eternity, so long as we don't blow it up completely. We should allow Russia to do whatever the fuck they want in Ukraine. We should publicly and officially denounce NATO, leave NATO, publicly and officially denounce the UN, leave the UN, and not just act like we left. Trump is currently acting like there is no international law, and he's acting in accord to his own morality and the best interests of America. That's great. But he needs to officially and publicly sever ties with all those organizations and say, this is the New World Order. We reject your one world government. Russia is the key to everything. If we want world peace, we need to be best fucking friends with Russia. Or at the very least, we cannot be enemies anymore. We cannot be in a proxy war with Russia. We've been in a proxy war with Russia for the past 4 years. Russia versus Ukraine was actually Russia versus the United States. Ukraine couldn't fire off the missiles without our technology and our men manning those machines. There are no supersonic drones without the United States. There are no nuclear missiles without the United States. They completely need us. They don't even have aircrafts that are able to carry these supersonic missiles from Ukraine to Russia. They need our aircrafts. So Ukraine isn't even in this war. This is the United States war against Russia. We need to end that war now. Trump needs to leverage his relationship with Putin to enter in a partnership. And we need to declare that this new multipolar world rejects globalism, and we are creating a new international order.
I think that would really send the dominoes. It would knock them over. It would knock the first one over for China to just go apeshit, basically. I think if we allied with Russia, they would realize that's their last chance to ever be a world power again, to ever be a potential world hegemon again, and they would take Taiwan and they would start sending aircraft carriers towards the United States. But I think if we can bluff hard enough, and if we can bark loud enough, then they won't do it just because they're too worried about what could happen. They're too worried about themselves. They don't have the kamikaze gene like the Japanese. They don't have it. They're self-preservationists, and they wouldn't act against their own self-interest just for the sake of honor or a last-ditch effort. I think it's an interesting idea. And I will say I was thinking about this Russia partnership earlier. Seems like if we were partners with Russia, and if that didn't have to involve foregoing our partnership with the rest of Europe, then that would be the best case scenario. And, we talk about globalism and what that means for America. And this might even sound like globalism, but I don't think it really is. If we are looking out for our own best interests, the best interest of American people, instead of those of other people everywhere else in the world, and sending all of our cash to villages in Africa, I think this is as America first as it gets. I would like to hear any responses to that as well.
Russia is very difficult because, from an international perspective and a war perspective, sure, they are socialist. However, they act like us in their own interest. But for the most part, I don't think they step outside of their bounds. With this war in Ukraine, first of all, Ukraine used to be part of the USSR. And then whenever NATO wanted to put their missiles in Ukraine, you can absolutely understand why Russia has to do something about it. So if we stepped away from the UN, if we became independent, I don't think we should be quote unquote allies with Russia, because I think our intent and their intent is a little bit different. But if you take two war powerhouses of the world and you make them completely independent, and they can act together in self-interest to keep the rest of the world from having wars and the rest of the world from overstepping their bounds without us and them overstepping our bounds, I think that's the best way for world peace. Because as long as we are not clashing heads with the next biggest powerhouse besides China, I think we can eliminate these countries like China and these fallen states from causing mass terror and ultimately starting another world war.
Is this not the World War right now? Is this not the World War III right now? Because we're going after Venezuela. Let's talk about BRICS. We're going after Venezuela. Iran is falling, which is most likely the work of the CIA. And we're making chess moves on the board against Russia and China and India. Who's also a part of BRICS. So I think this is the war. This is what war looks like now. It's not people on the trenches. This is diplomatic moves and sanctions to gain power and gain influence over the world.
I think it is 100% anti-war. I think us separating ourselves from the UN, us separating ourselves from these other countries that are partaking in war, and only looking after ourselves in terms of anti-war and self-defense, as long as we are independent and still a powerhouse of a military, take another independent powerhouse like Russia, I think together, not as allies, but as partners in anti-war, I believe we can prevent a third world war.
You're right. I mean, Russia is a great Christian country. I won't even call them an empire. They exist in their own sphere of influence. They only operate in the former USSR. And they don't even imperialize these countries. Not until we put nuclear weapons on their border and they have no choice. And they're actually okay with giving some back in an effort to make sure that their neighbors don't join NATO. Russia is a great Christian country. They so badly want to be a part of the West. And over again, we've given them the finger. Putin said it in his interview with Tucker just a couple years ago. He said, every president I've talked to, and this guy's been the president of Russia for a long time, many different regimes, many different American regimes, they all tell him, yes, let's be friends, let's cooperate. And every time after they shake hands, the CIA comes over top, US intelligence, and says the opposite, because they've been controlling our country this whole time. And these presidents we had were just puppets. Vladimir Putin makes the decisions in Russia. He is the president. In many ways, like Donald Trump is the president making the decisions in his second term right now. China hasn't gone into Taiwan because they don't want to start a nuclear war. Russia waited until it was almost too late to go into Ukraine because they didn't want to start a nuclear war. And what Trump did in Venezuela is breaking the ice, breaking the tension. He's basically saying, we're going to go in, we're going to take over Venezuela. And we might take over the Panama Canal and Colombia and Cuba. And hell, we might even buy Greenland from Denmark. And you guys can do whatever the fuck you want in your spheres as well. And now I think China is going to take Taiwan, although the Taiwanese people are actually pushing for Chinese reunification. I believe Russia is going to take swift action to take out Zelensky. When Zelensky is gone, that country is so unstable, and his right-hand men and the intelligence and military apparatus actually hate him so much that they will gladly join Putin in dethroning him and finding his successor. We're already hearing that the mullah is trying to flee and Iran's going to fall. They have massive rebel protests all over the country. And we got neocon scum like Lindsey Graham drooling at the thought of Iranian regime change. And now Trump's going to take Greenland from Denmark. Trump has reordered the geopolitical landscape. He's changed all the roles. So whatever you thought you knew, you don't. Do you guys have any thoughts about these other conflicts I mentioned? Taiwan, China, Iran, Greenland. I think there's a significant tie-in to Russia with Greenland that I want to hit on.
I think Greenland is interesting. I don't see the full reasoning behind it in terms of strategic benefit. I don't see why Denmark needs to have control of it. I also noted that there was a letter, basically a promise signed by our Secretary of State, somebody in the 1900s at some point, which said we wouldn't go and take Greenland from Denmark. So I'm interested to hear it.
So when it comes to Greenland, they are extremely resource rich. And I think that is the main purpose that the United States wants to have, quote unquote, custody over that land for personal gain, as Denmark currently has. And for those of you that do not know, Denmark, in terms of its per capita, is one of the, if not the richest country in the world, largely because of Greenland and the resources that it has.
True. This is all about resources and military bases. So Greenland signed this defense agreement with Denmark back in the 1950s that basically says the United States cannot be kicked out of Greenland. We have all these strategic military bases in Greenland for a reason. And now that Trump's trying to buy Greenland, Denmark suddenly is changing their mind. And they're saying there's little fine print in that agreement said that ultimately Denmark owns Greenland. And the people of Greenland are like, fuck you. Like, only 14% of the population of Greenland are actually native Greenlanders. Everybody else are these royals from Denmark, these Danish fucks that weren't from there in the first place. The reality is we have this agreement that says that they can't kick the U.S. out of our military bases in Greenland, and we're just going to go in and take over the place anyway. So what is Denmark going to do? They're threatening military action. They're saying we're going to send your boys back to Chicago and Ohio, because those are probably the only two geographical locations they know in the United States, because they're fucking retarded and they live in Denmark. I couldn't even tell you where Denmark is on a map, but here we are talking about it. What makes this such a strategic location for the United States military are these Baltic and Arctic corridors. Essentially, these are critical transportation routes for Russia to get from one hemisphere to the other. And by cutting this off, it will deliver a massive hit to the Russian economy and their military. And that's why we would do it. This gives us leverage. Now, if we take Greenland, because they're all, Russia's also in Greenland drilling oil, and they have their own military bases. So they're going to be pissed if we take Greenland. And this is going to impact our negotiations in Ukraine, in the Ukraine war. You could say this is bad because the negotiations have been so unsuccessful. What I think Trump is doing is Trump's saying, take Ukraine. Take whatever you want in Ukraine. We're done. You guys have your sphere. We have our sphere. We're taking Greenland because it's in our hemisphere. And there's nothing you can do about it. And Russia might be totally okay with that. I think we should just take Greenland and fuck it, take Denmark too. Why not? While we're at it. And then we'll be surrounding Canada on all three corners. And next time Trump goes to visit Carney and tells him he's going to be the next governor, Carney may just get on his knees and beg him to do it. Because if not, he knows he's going to end up in a prison cell in the Southern District of New York, just like his buddy Maduro.
I say, why not? If we have to buy it off of them, let's make it a purchase like they used to do with the Native Americans, where it was like, all right, we're going to give the chief this amount of money, and even though all of the regular people don't want to do it, we're still gonna buy the land. But all things considered and all jokes aside, I don't see enough of a strategic benefit to take Greenland. It's not like we have an adversary in Denmark. It's not like we couldn't use Greenland if we wanted to. So I don't see the point of taking control of it. I mean, we basically already have control of it, and we don't need to buy it. So I say hold our guns on this one.
If we were to leave the UN, if we were to become our own independent, ally-less country, we will need Russia if anybody was to attack us. If the entire UN waged war against the US, while I'm confident in our military, I'm confident in our people, I'm confident in our weapons, that'd be a huge war, and we would more than likely need some help. So, and my problem is, in the past, whenever Russia has been getting into their own international affairs, the US has always given them the stiff arm. They said, no, we're not going to help you. So why would Russia help us now? If we keep going down this path, are we leaving ourselves out to dry?
No. As I said, Russia has shown tremendous restraint, and they've tried again and again to make a deal with the United States. Trump is trying to make the best deal for Ukraine over and over again. They're saying, no, you don't have that leverage in our sphere of influence. And Trump was trying to appease his globalist overlords before, but now that system's broken. He said, you know what? We're going to let Russia do whatever they want. We're going to do whatever we want in the Western Hemisphere. And we're going to be able to move forward with a extremely strong economic and military partnership, just like a partnership we have with Israel. We're not allies, we're partners with Russia that will allow us to run the world and create a Western hegemony, not a communist socialist hegemony, a Western Christian hegemony. That's what we want. The people of Russia share our values, especially conservative values. Russia is not socialist. They have a capitalist economy, but we have given them no choice but to be isolationists. They are completely self-sufficient. as we said, all of their oil comes from their domestic oil fields. All of China's oil, over 70%, comes from Russian oil fields. They figured out how to be self-sufficient. And they're doing a pretty good job of it. By lifting sanctions, ending these wars, and engaging in a partnership, Russia will be able to thrive more than we could ever imagine. And Putin has showed time and time again that this is what he wants. He doesn't want to be China's bitch. And in the new multipolar world, he'll never be our bitch for sure, because we live on opposite sides of the world with a big drink in between us. China is right on his border. So if he has the United States, he doesn't have to worry about the United States causing him any issues. And he can use them as leverage in conversations with his neighbor, China. A partnership between Russia and China is mutually beneficial. If you follow any Russian media, like RT, they love Alex Jones. Putin has invited Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson to Moscow over and over and over and over again. And they don't lie about their intentions. He feeds Alex all these talking points because he's not trying to hide what he wants from the United States. The United States just won't give him what he wants. So he's trying to make it abundantly clear. There's a reason that when Tucker Carlson interviewed Putin, he gave a massive history lesson, because nobody in the United States was taught the history of Russia, the history of the Soviet Union, how it came to be, and the history of NATO, and how we're basically encroaching on their territory and threatening them with nuclear weapons. And they have no choice but to defend themselves. And now we found ourselves in the same situation in Venezuela, and Trump took action, which is basically a green light to Putin to do what he wants. I really hope this happens, because the only way to save us from a nuclear holocaust is an exclusive partnership with Russia.
I respect Vladimir Putin so much. I always have. I'm going to go as far to say I think he is the smartest, most intelligent world leader. But the issue is he's 73 years old. Who comes next? Are they going to be equally intelligent? Are they going to be able to work with the United States to prevent wars and to, as you said, Lou, join Western society and continue to thrive when there's a new leader in Russia?
That's why we need to make this partnership before Putin's out of office. He is the one that's been trying to make this happen for decades. And he's held hold of power because he wants Russia to have global prominence. He wants them to have good relations with the United States because he knows that's the only way to prevent what happened to the USSR from happening again. So hopefully Trump realizes this, and that's why he's making massive geopolitical moves, and we can move closer, even if it's just a few inches closer, to that strategic partnership with Russia. Now, we talked about the oil, the new multipolar world, the death of globalism, and the treachery of nation building, and what happens next for Venezuela and all across the globe. Now, let's talk about this new divide that's been created in the America First movement. My question to you guys is, what does it mean to be America First? If I asked you this before the Venezuelan raid, your answer may be completely different than what it is today. And that's because the entire landscape has changed. Everything we thought we knew is no more. And we have to think a little deeper. So all those people out there on either sides of the aisle, whether you're anti-war isolationist or a white-pilled MAGA imperialist, you're not right. You're not correct. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong, but you cannot judge people based on where they stand on the situation. Like, we're talking about every single angle on this because we've never seen this before, at least not in our lifetimes. So what does it mean to be America First? We have a new split. It's nationalism versus moralism, or a type of libertarian non-interventionalism. On the nationalism side, Americans could benefit from $17 trillion in confiscated oil. The libertarian debate is, does the oil belong to the United States in the first place? As I said earlier, does it even matter if it belongs to us? As a nationalist, you want to put your country first. You want to focus on your sphere of influence. So hemispheric sovereignty is important, and the West needs the energy. So we're not going to let you, China and Russia, pull it out of our hemisphere. That's a pretty nationalist thing. We're not going to allow the oil industry in the Western Hemisphere to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. This is nationalism. But then on the moralism side, it's like, can't we achieve everything we've ever wanted to achieve as a country without imperialism and without killing people across the globe? Not to mention, like, where are all the deep state indictments? Like, why are we blaming Venezuela for all these mega criminals that have destroyed the United States and created this new world order and this one world government globalist system? And on the moral side, it's like, as we said, are Venezuelans actually happy about regime change? We're seeing conflicting reports. And the question is, we don't know yet. Some like it, some don't. Some are indifferent. And we're just going to have to see how it plays out. So, Nimrods, where do you fall on this debate? What does it mean to be America first, post-Venezuela?
It means what it's always meant, Lou. It means to be looking out for the American people and their interests. It doesn't mean to be looking out for foreign countries and their interests. If their interests benefit us, then maybe we can make an exception. I think that being America first means reading up on all the history that we have with the Monroe Doctrine and the Roosevelt Corollary and understanding how actions in our hemisphere can benefit us as a people and as a country. So I think when we're acting in the best interests of Americans and the country as a whole, we are being America first. The line is drawn whenever we're taking actions that are completely pointless, and some might even say dual interest or simply foreign interest because of money. So I see this as a America First win, and so does Nick Fuentes. And I think everybody's on the same page here.
I can see all sides of the story. I think you're exactly right, Lou. I think everybody is wrong. However, every little detail to some sort of extent makes sense and can be seen somewhat as correct. I'm a moralist, and I don't think it is okay to go and take somebody else's things. And I also believe that America first means self-preservation, somewhat isolation, looking out for yourself. And if we have allies, to some sort of extent, looking out for your allies. But that's why I want to leave the UN. That's why I want to become independent. I only want to worry about ourselves. And I think if we're worrying about ourselves and Russia's worrying about themselves and their hemisphere, anti-war can be achieved, and America can be America first by only worrying about themselves and worrying about their growth and their population. But the issue is America has so many internal problems with each other. We got to get something figured out. We got to figure out our own morality within this country, go back to our roots, go back to what we were founded on, and come back as one nation. And I have little faith in that right now.
Yeah, like if Trump's going to go into Venezuela and take the oil, he needs to use that money to pay down our debt, inject it into the American populace, and do not send it overseas to Ukraine or Israel. If we're going to get involved, if we're going to intervene, there has to be a benefit for not just America or American companies, but the American people. Gas should be 2 cents. 2 cents if we have all this fucking oil. And if we're going to sell it all, then cut my income taxes, cut my property taxes. Give us a stimulus. Fuck it. Make America a better place to live. If we're going to conquer, if we're going to be an empire, we should, as the American people, we the people of the United States of America should prosper. We the people of the United States of America are the monarchs of this country, especially as heritage Americans. We built this country. We elect leaders. We run the country. We have all the power vested in us by the Constitution that was gifted to us by our founding fathers and God. So if we're going to be a world power, we're going to reap the benefits. Now, while I understand why Trump's doing this, I never would have told him to do it in the first place. And I have a lot of problems with him taking such a big risk. But the initial operation worked out, And now we're playing a waiting game for Act Two, and who knows how it's going to go. But while this is all happening, while the entire geopolitical global landscape is being transformed before our eyes, and we can't predict anything. This is so unpredictable, so complicated. While all this is happening, all this chaos, the Democrats, who have been awfully quiet as of recent and staying out of the news, have decided to execute the Podesta plan. We've been harping on this for so long, and we got distracted by Venezuela. And now that Venezuela and every other geopolitical conflict across the globe now that is going to happen inevitably, the Democrats are seizing this opportunity. Ultimately, the Republican Party is never going to be unified ever again. We're never going to have this Trump coalition again. We're going to split at least into two, and there's going to be a new system in America. But we can't do this until the deep state establishment uniparty is dead. Clinton, Clapper, Comey, Brennan, Obama, Bolton, Biden need to be in prison. They need to be behind bars. They need to be punished. They need to be completely removed and peacefully, lovingly, non-violently eliminated from not just the conversation, but the entire system. Because Trump only has 3 more years left. And who knows if we're going to win in 2028. We need to make sure that we cut off the heads of the Hydra and cut off the funding. USAID was a good start, so that these color revolutions of the radical left and of the neocon scumbags of this country can happen no longer. Where are the deep state indictments? Why are people living in the streets killing themselves with drugs? Why can't I afford a home? Why can't I have children? Why can I not work a blue-collar job and own a home and have a great life like our grandparents and our great-grandparents before us? I understand what Trump's doing, foreign policy-wise, but he needs to move extremely quickly domestically. RFK Jr. needs to go rapid warp speed on Maha and gather as much research and intel as possible that his policies can't be reversed. Trump needs to move extremely fast in the geopolitical landscape so that we can't revert back to a new world order, so that globalism dies. So I understand what he's doing there. But we also need to fix our economy. The affordability crisis isn't going away. And if we lose the midterms, they're going to impeach Trump. If they impeach Trump, or they pack the House, or we lose the Senate, we're going to see no progress from the GOP, the American Populist Party, until 2028, if we're lucky enough to win that election. We need to eliminate the Democrat deep state. We need to kill the uniparty. We need to prioritize Americans. We need to make America prosperous. We need to bring back the American dream, especially for young people, because those are the people whose votes are going to matter in 2028 and beyond. Those are the people that are going to actually save this country. We had a lot of fighters in Gen X and the millennials, but we're taking over. And we all hate war. And we're all sick and tired of being pushed around. We grew up amidst the COVID pandemic, the scamdemic that uprooted all of our lives. We're pissed. And we need to prosper if we're going to become an empire. We don't put gold trimmings all over the White House and give Trump his own throne. We uplift the American people. We will be living luxurious lives, not just our corporate oligarchs and our politicians. We will be prospering, and we've yet to see it yet. Any other thoughts?
To kind of conclude with this regime change that's going to happen in Venezuela, I want to ask you all a question. So if another country was to come in and kill the president of the United States and then have an influence that they want to put in his place to run the country, you've got two situations. Either we share the same beliefs and they put in a George Washington figure that the country loves. All is good, regime change successful. Or we're on two different pages and we put in, let's say, a sleepy Joe Biden, and the entire country is unhappy with them. And so in the next election, they're going to go back to their roots. regime change is only going to be effective if the people of that country believe in it, and only time will tell.
I say it depends who the president is. If it was a communist who was militarily taking control of the country and stealing elections and silencing opposition, I think I would be rather pleased that he was kidnapped and brought to another land and replaced. About the replacement thing, I think that obviously we want to have continuity in Venezuela. We don't want to have to go do this again. So I think if we can preserve the interests of the Venezuelan people in terms of freedom and allow them an affordable lifestyle and not to be crushed by poverty, I think that's as good as we can get. The ideological piece of it is more of a question mark, but I don't think that's our problem at all at this point.
I guess my point is it's entirely outside of the United States' power to see where this regime change will end in the future for Venezuela. It could end very well, or they could go back to the roots. And it has nothing to do with the United States or any of their influence whatsoever, unless we're going to take some of our people and go and live there. It's ultimately up to the Venezuela people with a free and fair election to restore their country and rebuild.
Ultimately, it comes down to this. We are entering a new phase of humanity. There is a new international order, and there's new rules. And we must adapt, but we cannot lose what it means to be an American on a basic level. The reality is this operation conducted by the Trump administration was unbelievably successful, almost a miracle. And whether or not you supported it in the first place, it already happened, and we need to focus on what happens next. Regime change almost never works with the United States. We are not nation builders. But if we are able to allow the Venezuelan people to elect their next president and be happy with their decision, but still keep our thumb on that president and make sure that they are pro-America, or at the very least, they fear America, we will be better off than we were with Maduro. And all we can do is hope that it was the right decision. But President Trump, I have a message for you. While you're busy playing God across the globe, I need you to remember who put you there. The American people gave you a mandate. You had one mission: America first. You're asserting our dominance across the globe. And now you need to give us the fruits of your adventures. You have defeated globalism. You have taken down the New World Order. You have delivered a death blow to the one world government, to Klaus Schwab's Cloward and Piven technocracy. But you have yet to reward us for your ventures. Finally, you agree. The answer to 1984 is 1776. Don't forget who put you there, Donald. We deserve the riches. We deserve the glory. And above all, Christ will reign across this globe as President of the United States. Donald Trump is temporary. Christ is eternal. The only path to salvation is through Christ the Lord. Thank you all for watching and listening. Be sure to hit that like button, repost, share this must-watch transition, and we'll see you guys next week.